Hello there. Welcome to Just the Discs. We talk about Blu-rays here and 4Ks. And for this episode, I'm going to get started with some 4K discussion. I have two pretty big ones. One huge one for me, and then another old favorite that I haven't seen in a long time and finally got to rewatch on 4K. But I'm going to start with the old favorite. It is from Criterion. It is Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused from 1993. Now, for me, this movie is an all-timer. And I think one of the great Americana cinema films of all time. You know, just a really great slice of, American life in the 1970s. It's the last day of school, 1976 in Texas, and it is an amalgamation of a couple different schools, as I understand it, from Linklater, but I can get into that in a minute. But it is a bunch of stories of things that happened to him, maybe happened to some people he knew, but it is very specific in terms of the the rituals of this particular high school / junior high transition. And one of the things is to do with this hazing that happens when you leave junior high and are about to enter high school. The seniors are allowed to paddle the boys, and the girls have their own sort of hazing process. But it is just one small part of this one crazy night kind of movie, and it's an incredible ensemble cast that I absolutely love. The cast includes, of course, Matthew McConaughey in a very early but prominent role, and one that was sort of developed into being a bigger role than it was. And one of the problems Linklater had, I think, with this film is that at the time, none of these actors were known, but they've gone on to be more known. Jason London, Wiley Wiggins, Roy Cochrane, Joy Lauren Adams, Adam Goldberg, Anthony Rapp, Sasha Jensen, Cole Hauser. It is a real ensemble movie, and like I said, I love it. I have a complicated relationship with it in that I used to, when it first came out, be sort of against it, or there were people I knew that liked it that I didn't particularly like, and this is graduating my high school, going into college that year, and I just, for whatever reason, I wrote it off as some kind of stoner, comedy, like, I don't know, Cheech and Chong, which, not to say that those aren't good movies, but at some point I was denigrating that kind of film, and this movie is so much more than that. It's such an incredible, like I said, ensemble piece, answer to American Graffiti, tops American Graffiti as far as I'm concerned, and just really stunning stuff. I found this really great essay or article that Linklater himself wrote for The Guardian in, I think, 2019. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it to you. Pardon my reading, but I think it's fascinating. He says, quote, "I thought the 1970s sucked. Dazed was supposed to be an anti-nostalgic movie, but it's like trying to make an anti-war movie. Just by depicting it, you make it look fun. I wanted to do a realistic teen movie. Most of them had too much drama and plot, but teenage life is more like if you're looking for the party, looking for something cool, the endless pursuit of something you never find, and even if you do, you never quite appreciate it. An experimental version of the film had been floating around in my head between 1989 and 91, just four guys driving around in a car, busting mailboxes to ZZ Top. I really did that one night in this little town in South Houston with a friend. By the end of the evening, we had driven 138 miles and never left the city limits. But I quickly realized I had to represent different points of view. I wrote a long first draft. In about a month, we leapfrogged about 30 other projects that were in development at Universal. There were few teenage movies at the time. Remember, this is 1993. So every young actor was clamoring to be in it. We cast in New York, where I met Parker Posey. I forgot to mention her. Los Angeles and Austin. Wiley Wiggins was the big find there. He was a 15-year-old with all the bad habits of a grad student, smoking cigarettes, hanging out at coffee shops, my kind of guy. I made the actors mixtapes of music their characters would listen to. The girls got a lot of Joni Mitchell. Mitch, Wiley's character, was at the cooler end of the 70s, glam and prog rock. He would be the first guy to buy the Ramones. I wanted it to look like it was shot in the 70s, so I didn't use Steadicam. Stylistically, it was trying its best to look like one of those drive-in movies. I still have PTSD when I think about how difficult the shoot was. About a month after we started filming, Tom Pollock, the head of Universal, watched my previous movie, Slacker, at which point he realized who he was doing business with, and he thought, oh no, it's going to be one of those Artie Jerkovsky movies. Everyone was on high alert for me after that. Improvisation was one of the things that made the studio nervous, but in addition to a lot of additional humor, it added a lot of additional humor to Dazed and Confused. Not everyone picks up the vibe of what you're trying to do, though. There was one actor, Sean Andrews, who wasn't exactly rocking and rolling with the rest of the cast, so I switched things around to expand Matthew McConaughey's role instead. After shooting was over, I went to Los Angeles for the finishing touches. The studio put me up in a soulless corporate accommodation. I didn't think I was going to be there for long, but I realized they were doing this psyops thing on me, trying to wear me down. People seemed to really enjoy the screenings, but then their ratings on certain aspects were always lower than the executives thought they should be, which confirmed their fears I had made an art film. They wanted me to put in modern music or reshoot, but I didn't take any of their dumb ideas. The film made $8 million on a $6.9 million budget. I never made a penny off anything to do with it. I waived most of our rights to pay for the soundtrack. I don't think it's my best movie, but it represents a rite of passage for the Busters, the end of the baby boom generation. I also enjoy people who weren't even born liking the film. It tells you something, that there's something about teenagedom that never changes. So sorry for that lengthy reading, but I do love that essay. I think that is a really interesting backstory to the film. And another thing I love about this release is that it has all the features of the previous Criterion Edition, which includes the audio commentary from Richard Linklater, and Making of Dazed and Confused documentary, which is great. You know, you're talking to the cast and Linklater, and it's really nice stuff with behind-the-scenes footage, and there's rare on-set interviews and footage there. Footage from the 10-year anniversary celebration, audition footage and deleted scenes, plus essays by critic Kent Jones, Jim DeRogatis, and Chuck Klosterman, reprinted recollections of the filming from the cast and crew, and character profiles from the Dazed and Confused companion book, as well as an original poster, which is in here as well. So this includes the 4K and the Blu-ray. And that commentary is one of my favorite commentaries. It's just, I think it has to do with how much I love the movie, and hearing Linklater, you know, talk about the movie in the way that he does, so frankly, really makes it stand out to me. It's just like a movie I love, and then you hear all this behind-the-scenes stuff, some of which comes out in that little article there, like the idea of shooting it as a 70s-looking film, not using Steadicam, etc. That kind of stuff is neat, but just like, I mean, I wrote down a bunch of little things here. The initial idea for the opening with Sweet Emotion, which is one of my favorite openings of a movie. You hear the like big, very rumbling beginnings of Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith playing under the Polygram and the Polygram logo, and then we see the GTO Judge orange car driving through the school parking lot, and Linklater admits that he got the idea for that while in the dentist chair under, I guess, nitrous oxide or something influence. He was under the drug influence. And it was an inspired thing that happened. So that's a heck of a great dentist visit for all the rest of us. He said it's sort of the greatest hits of his freshman and other high school years rolled into one day. I kind of mentioned that. He had two older sisters himself. So like Mitch, Wiley Wiggins' character in the movie, the upperclassmen sort of had it in for him and came after him. He does a little Night of the Hunter homage when the mom pulls a shotgun on Affleck's character. But he also had heard a story of how that had actually happened. A lot of the music cues were written into the script. Music was a huge element of the movie. he said he blew past his budget on Slacker, which was $23,000, by the time the Aerosmith kicks in the first seconds of Dazed and Confused, because that was a $100,000 song apparently at the time. So I find that fascinating. He did love having a budget so that he could license the music. He says, I guess many of the songs had dropped out of radio play popularity at the time this film came out, and this soundtrack seems to truly have immortalized a lot of these songs. One of the great soundtracks of all time, in my opinion. He says music articulated all that you couldn't when you were young, and this movie really started with the music. Let's see. So he says 6.9 million, made back 8 million, but then I read it later pulled in something like 30 million on home video, and he saw none of that money, unfortunately, but obviously he got to make the movie he wanted to make. Let's see here. He told the actors what their characters were listening to, and he also cast their cars, even though most of the cars that these characters drive, as much as they, really encapsulate those characters, he said, in the commentary, frankly, a lot of them probably wouldn't have been able to afford those cars. And he himself only got hand-me-downs, Volkswagens and stuff like that. So he never had a nice car. Although I guess he got a GTO after, because he talked about an insert shot. Anyway, he tried to get as many different handshakes as he could into the movie, which might be fun to count all of them. When I think about it, there are a lot of people greeting each other with special handshakes and stuff like that. And he also mentions that he was thwarted by corporate America on many accounts because of teenagers drinking and smoking and swearing. Corporate America wanted nothing to do with this movie. So the Kiss statues were originally, I guess in real life, somebody had stolen a Ronald McDonald and made him into Kiss, but they couldn't do that. Sonic, the burger joint, was what he wanted to use instead of Top Notch, but he couldn't, I guess, get that. And then Schlitz Beer wouldn't allow them to use their beer because teens were drinking. I find this really funny. I was actually just watching Switchblade Sisters, Jack Hill's, 70s exploitation girl gang movie. And I happened to notice there were at least 3 different major beers. I mean, Olympia, maybe not a major, but then I saw Coors and I saw, I want to say Miller Lite, maybe. At least 2 major beers that were totally fine with, I guess, being used in an exploitation movie in the 1970s, which to my mind were meant to sell beer, at drive-ins anyway. So I guess they were a little more open-minded in the 70s than they were in 1993. Schlitz Beer wouldn't have it. I mean, of course, I didn't see Schlitz in this movie, but anyway, I just thought that was funny. So this is great. It's a 4K scan. It mentions new digital restoration of the director's cut, supervised and approved by Linklater. Now, I haven't done a side-by-side of this versus the old Blu-ray, which I don't know if the transfer would be the same on the Blu-ray here or different. I don't know. I'm assuming it would be different, but anyway, it looks very good. Color is good. Detail is good. It's just one of those where I had to have it. I've owned it since VHS, DVD, multiple Blu-ray editions, and now this 4K. It's just an all-timer for me that I have to have. So I found that there was no question of whether or not I was going to get it. I have to get it. But whether or not people want to know, is it worth it for you to get the upgrade? I guess it depends on how much you love the movie. For me, I'm like, I can't not. But it looks good. It looks as good as I've ever seen it look. That's really all I can say. So hats off to Criterion for this wonderful upgrade of a true American classic in Dazed and Confused. Now, shifting gears very much, let's talk about John Schlesinger's Marathon Man from 1976. Of course, interestingly, I just realized the connection here. The 1976, of course, when Dazed and Confused takes place, and then this film is actually made in 1976. Could have been at a drive-in theater in that movie. So I find that fascinating. That said, this movie, I had totally forgotten so much about it. It was a favorite for me in college. It was produced by Robert Evans. I did not remember that. Script by William Goldman from his own novel. Didn't really remember that. Shot by the great Conrad Hall, one of the truly spectacular cinematographers of the 1970s. And I will say this about the transfer. It looks very good, and it is a brand new HDR Dolby Vision master from a 4K scan of the original camera negative. So it's looking as good as it's going to look. Now, that said, it's a little soft in parts. The detail is still good, but there's something about the style and the way films were shot at this time. I don't know if it's film stocks or exactly what, but it's a little soft in parts. So it's not going to be quite as sharp looking as some 70s 4Ks you might have seen. But it's, again, as good as I've ever seen it look, and definitely worth the upgrade, I think. But just putting that out there, from my eye, it was a little tiny bit soft, but again, great detail and color, etc. So that said, John Schlesinger, the director, of course, British filmmaker and stage director, got going in the UK with films like Billy Liar with Tom Courtenay, and then Darling with Julie Christie, and Far from the Madding Crowd with Candice Bergen. And then he'd fully break out in the U.S. in 1969 with Midnight Cowboy, which won him all kinds of acclaim and was truly a breakout, like I said. And he followed that with Sunday Bloody Sunday, and then Day of the Locust in 1975 with Karen Black. And then follows that up with this, Marathon Man in 1976. His first thriller, as he says in the making of that's included here. And it is a really, very solid paranoid thriller, part of a tradition/movement of paranoid thrillers that came out in the 1970s that included things like Clute, The Parallax View, All the President's Men, which also had Hoffman, obviously, 3 Days of the Condor, The Conversation, Winter Kills, Executive Action. This is all post-Watergate, political paranoia kind of movies. And again, there's just so much I forgot about this movie. I forgot about the crazy opening with two old men accosting each other on the streets of New York in their cars. And then there's a gigantic explosion that happens, and that's sort of part of the plot. I forgot about all the Roy Scheider stuff. Dustin Hoffman plays a graduate student working on his thesis at, I can't remember if it's Columbia, but his dad was a political figure of sorts. I won't go into details, and he's dead. And so there's some flashbacks that explain that. He's got a brother played by Roy Scheider, who is ostensibly in the oil business, but maybe into espionage. So I'd forgotten all about that. I forgot about William Devane, who's in the movie and who I like very much, doing a lot of great work around this time. Rolling Thunder would be the next year. And I just remember the Olivier stuff. Olivier plays a pivotal role in the film, and I'm not going to give away his character. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of a cool, not cool character, but a cool reveal in terms of who he is and what his history is. And there's just the classic lines, "Is it safe?" And those are all things that I recalled. But beyond that, there was a lot of gaps, a lot of things that just slips completely out of my mind. Characters that get killed in the movie I didn't remember, just lots of stuff. Oh, Mart Keller is also in this as this woman that Dustin Hoffman meets on campus. And she sort of gets embroiled in this whole thing. But it's a sort of, again, I won't go into the plot because I really think it's more interesting to watch it cold, but it is a thriller that involves ex-Nazis and, sort of a treasure, if you will, some diamonds and things like that. And it is fascinating and is very tense throughout. It really has a great sense of paranoia. It's well directed by Schlesinger. He really keeps the tension and the paranoia building. There's a really incredible scene where somebody gets taken in the film, and it's done so effectively that it started to come back to me a little bit as I watched it. We stay with the victim, and we don't see the kidnappers. We just hear them whispering, and then they start trying to take the door off the hinges of the room that the victim is in. and it's really unsettling. And the score is also helpful in that department. It was composed by Michael Small, who also did Clute and The Parallax View. He was really hot in the 70s and doing this kind of really unsettling, unnerving, sometimes minimalistic, using odd instruments throughout the 3 films that I mentioned there. Really great scores that really help make those thrillers that much more uncomfortable and just suspenseful. So let's see here. There's also some torture scenes in the movie, which are kind of cringe-inducing and hard to watch. And I won't go into that, but I definitely remembered those. Now, in terms of features, we have the commentary by Steve Mitchell and Nathaniel Thompson. Solid stuff. Those two are always solid. I enjoy their rapport and how they do commentaries and the facts they bring in, the relevant stuff about cast and production, etc. So solid commentary. That's new. The other things I think are ported over from DVD. The Magic of Hollywood, the original making of The Marathon Man, is 21 minutes, and it's a vintage piece that opens with producer Robert Evans sitting at a desk narrating, and he basically is the spine of the thing. He narrates the whole, this is why we made this movie, basically, and then they include interviews with director John Schlesinger, Dustin Hoffman, and Mark Keller as well, talking about their feelings about the film at the time of filming. And then, of course, we have Going the Distance, Remembering the Marathon Man, which is 29 minutes. And that, again, I think was made for the DVD. More Robert Evans. This time, William Goldman is interviewed. Roy Scheider is interviewed. And then we get Dustin Hoffman and Mark Keller as well, giving their recollections from, the early 2000s, I would assume, when the DVD came out. And that's equally interesting to see because you've got both an almost on-set perspective versus, many years later. And then, of course, there's some rehearsal footage included as well, which is neat. But a very solid 70s thriller, and one that I feel like, of the films I mentioned, maybe talked about a little less than some of those. So definitely one I recommend checking out. Great performance by Dustin Hoffman. He's incredibly vulnerable, and it's tough to watch because he didn't do a lot of thrillers, and so seeing him in peril is tricky, and he does a great job with it. So that is Marathon Man on 4K Ultra HD from Kino Lorber. And next up, we'll be talking about more Blu-rays at some point. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.